A smugness, oh, excuse me, decaying philosopher of phenomenology named Kaliza. A couple of Pauls lived near me. Um, Heidegger buff told me that he had me read an existential French short story in which the man was being interrogated whereabouts of his partners, and finally he made a place up. When the police got back, they let him go and slapped him on the back because his made up place was where they were hiding. He also liked the notebooks of Salvador Dali. He lived next door to me. That's reason enough for grounds for suspicion. But I won't go into that. He said something very apt, which was he said, I wrote my articles off the top of my head, and nobody reading could see it. Well, I tell you, I was a dishwasher. I was deaf. I couldn't make it very far in school. His comment was not very involved and certainly was not a comment. I mean, it was a compliment. He saw me, my seriousness is to be dismissed. He didn't even think I deserved recognition in Pittsburgh as my birthplace on the sidewalks. He made that clear and direct to me. And he had, backroom goals, probably scary people. Ross Cronenberg could tell you about them. He said they met Mr. Gillespie, tearing wallpaper off his house. Well, as it turns out, that's how I feel. What he said had some truth to it. Sure, 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 it had some truth to it. I'm just a dishwasher. I recognize that myself. I was always in peer reviews when I would like. But I was a laughing stock. Peer exploitation was what I got. In fact, people follow me and heckle me because I learned from people who were calling them my friends. I learned something. Oh my God, kill it. Spy. You learned something in school. Spy. And so I'm not going to take on Jordan Peterson about his stuff because I don't know very much about him. He's intelligent. He commands a lot of admiration for being able to think off the top of his head an impressive um, demonstration of learning. He understands and can name the fields of various child psychologists. He's obviously read them, categorized them, remembers what they stood for, what their questions were, and can recognize when somebody has misconceptions about them. Even people who are very well known, Vygotsky and the various um, periods of development, proximal development, they call it. He's very chatty about it. I would have to review all of that to get into any of it. Yeah, but developmental learning theory probably plays a role in his bad faith towards the climate change movement because he's obviously stuck in a sort of loop-de-doop around Ayn Rand's philosophy of eccentric humanism being independent achievement and standard of living in the game of fair exchange. So he doesn't like government interference and stuff like that. It's the gist of it. And so, in other words, he grew up in a generation that was assumed in an environment where it was his proximal development. But I don't want to get into it because I don't know the facts. I do, however, know that my impression, keep in mind, I don't know the facts. This is only my impression, so you don't need to go calling the police to go check out my impressions and enforce them because Louis twisted his ankle somewhere. Whatever else is going on in the heads of the blood oath and death vows, licky chop parameters of the very extreme fringe of the mercenary battalions who recognize a sociopathic peacenik in Rod Carreri's battered little boy. In other words, you don't need to fly off the handle. I already know I don't have the dope. I'm a C-minus student when it comes to Jordan Peterson at best. I've enjoyed some of his talks, but the idea that we can't adapt to changes of norms, like go over to mass transit and bicycles and walking, and get rid of this status idea that everybody has to own a car, falls flat on its face for a person who believes in um, independent learning and free thought. The way that people deny that climate is a serious event threatening life on our planet is a smokescreen for their frozen zone of proximal development. They can't think outside of the presumptions that they have built for themselves. They have a square frame in which they draw all sorts of three-dimensional pictures, but you can't escape when you look at it that you're seeing it through a square frame, a flat two-dimensional frame. It's a handicap. I think people should read Václav Havel on the subject of disturbing the peace because there's a lot of rhetoric. Oh, there will be no peace until we save the biodiversity of the planet. Well, people will disturb the peace if we don't, that's for sure. But I believe in eco schools, not the stuff about equity. People who need to learn how to petition the government for social change and tax arrangements. It's the responsibility of the government and people who are charitably inclined to establish rules and schools in which people learn norms, behavioral norms are monitored and represented by the professional and talented law enforcement. And there's checks and balances. We need to mature as a society into our ideals. Herbert Agar used to talk about that. We need to realize we're in the same old world and that if we don't struggle for our ideals, no one will. So, what I suggest is that people in the climate change movement look at constructive, creative tension, Martin Luther King called it, but constructive engagement of the disturbances that they're causing with intellectual awareness of what the changes they want to bring about. I talked about the eco schools theory and I posted 7 recommended fields in ecology. And people should at minimum be able to recognize and identify those 7 fields. I once said that the Rainbow Coalition left Pennsylvania's national forest trash, and they said, no, that's not true. We picked up the whole thing afterwards. We're good as gold. And I said, that's nice to hear. I'm glad. I'd love to hear Jordan Peterson set me straight. He doesn't believe, no, that climate change is completely fiction. So set me straight on that score. What Václav Havel wrote about was a point of view that constructively engaged the opposition. He would articulate their point of view and then express his own and compare the two of them. He didn't denounce them. There was a play in which there were two men. One was a Soviet Rube, and the other was an activist who was in danger. For a common friend of the two of them was arrested, and he tried to get the men in state to sign the petition, and said, "No, I can't, but that's exactly what I wanted to see you about." Turns out the man in the state's back room wheeling to and gets the prisoner freed. So you can see that he humanized. This is something that is lost on people who don't understand the Velvet Revolution. He humanized the people who were at work with the Russians trying to change things from within, trying to bring about reform. He and Gorbachev brought about a period of reform, which is why I was so defeated and defended as an academic of the times. Not, I mean, an armchair academic. Give me some credit. Martha Gellhorn was interested enough to write to me. When Bush said, and John Tower and all these guys are dumping on Russians for, oh, they're even going to be more menacing. I mean, it was the constructive engagement of Russia's and the Russian statecraft through a process of mutual analysis that allowed him to facilitate the secession of Slovakia from Czechoslovakia, talking about the Czech Republic and the separate state of Slovakia, which he believed in. He believed it should have stayed Czechoslovakia. And this is the period from that America pushed aside when they cold shouldered Boris Yeltsin, which is why what happened to Yanukovych in Kiev concerns me. That was a dialogue period, a period where people could have been constructive, where Havel's people could have said, we understand where the hesitation of Russian Federation to endorse immediately joining the European Union comes from, which is what Havel would have done if it was Slovakia, saying we want to secede. Now you could say the burden of proof is on the Russian Federation. They should have stepped forward with the Havel of their own. I know that. I'm talking about the climate change movement. Climate change movement needs to understand where Jordan Peterson is coming from, because you not only have a potential for an alliance there, you have a potential for a more soft and caring secession from the climate change abuse, which is what happened when Václav Havel reluctantly helped Slovakia articulate their positions and reasons for secession. He did it because he wanted to persuade them to stay. They overruled but there was never conflict. It didn't erupt into a civil war. Far from it. Now, the other thing that's interesting about Havel is he has something called the art of the impossible. The art of the impossible, when I read it, represented diplomatic skillfulness through appreciation at its best in Europe. I did think he fell short when he sounded the note in favor of George Bush. And one of the peers of the Havel scene, the Sam, is that the Velvet Revolution, Charter 77. He predated Charter 77. He was the leader of Prague Spring, was Ivan Svitek. He came to teach here. And he said, when you say the word Marxist in an American class, it's like being Galileo. And TCC has a guy who starts his class, Marxism is beautiful. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to say. You know, and he shows the film Young Karl Marx support this idea. You know, look, you know, after all, you know, the age of Abraham Lincoln was the beginning of the terrible child labor of the robber barons. And Marx had read the Lincoln. It was the same era. Now, it's worth knowing these things, you know. There's a lot of legitimacy to these things. They can put to good or bad use. But the point is that when Ivan Svatak came to the United States, he had been being cheered by the right wing, the people like the Bushy Tunes, for leading Prague Spring. But he said they didn't want anything to do with him when they found out that Czech nationalists had something good to say about socialism and Marxism. You know, what gives that we're that unprincipled, that we can't even charitably listen to our people who we erect as our martyrs. It's ridiculous. You know, it's terrible of you to put me in a position of being perceived as someone um, double crossing Greta or Zelensky or even Putin because I'm a nobody, you know. But you know, it's disingenuous. It's disgraceful. These people are important, prominent individuals. If you want to make me important and prominent individual, you should make me one as somebody who's been used as an albatross, because that at least has the benefit of being the truth. So my view of Zelensky is the whole situation is mysterious, but he's a very commanding, admirable person. I have no idea anything else about him. Nobody wants anything to happen to these people. I love Greta Thunberg. That's obvious. Nobody could mistake it. As for Putin, he's sounded gunboat scene that I did completely disapprove of. But I admit that until that he did that, seemed like an interesting person. He says things that are perfectly apt. So it's all very mysterious to me. But I think when you see things like without biodiversity, there will be no peace, they mean disturbing the peace. Don't make it something it isn't. You know, people like that Rachel woman, uh, who's such a darling of the Cornell West Club, makes, you know, even disagreeing with Seattle's clique a threat and offense against all things moral. You should be locked up. You've looked at somebody funny. You know, this is Noam Chomsky, Bernie Sanders at their worst. Don't make it out to be something like that. I disapprove of the war in the Ukraine. It's very mysterious to me, but it's not my precinct. Now, when they said close the skies, I was aware, as Joe Biden was aware, as most of NATO was aware, that the Ukraine was not part of NATO. I also was aware that I wasn't being asked to control or contribute to the situation for that reason. I also know that I have been dogged night and day all my life by berserk Huns who tore my head off as a child because they couldn't bear the sight of a little boy with a peace sign on his arm. Don't take it to that. They say, oh, Pittsburgh will never respect somebody who doesn't fight back. Well, some kid came at me with scissors and I gave him a fat lip. So there you go. You don't need any more of that. Fighting back is a professional duty of people who are intellectually concerned with ascertaining the truth. They shot me in the face like they did in Malala and Serpica. What gives with these patterns? You know, those things interest me. Pittsburgh's Fernhollow Bridge gang sociopathy doesn't interest me in the least. It occupies me. They don't allow it not to occupy me. But disturbing the peace, when they say there won't be peace, the principal idea has to be assumed to be that they will be disruptive. And what I'm driving at and suggesting Vaclav Havel is find out the 7 studies of ecological professionals that are most worthwhile. Find out what works and doesn't work. Go to school and become an ecological professional. These are the issues. Read the new book, the climate book, and the book, A Bigger Picture. Become familiar with ecologist past like Buckminster Fuller. Understand what people who are different from you are trying to say. These are the goals of Vaclav Havel in disturbing the peace. And remember that you can help an opposition leader or spokesperson or diplomat ease the path to their own disapproval of your position by being a little bit generous towards them, by understanding their views. Now somebody's going to smart aleck is going to say, "Well, I'll just take a different approach to that with you." That's the Fernhollow Bridge gang. We've seen the results of what happened at Fernhollow Bridge. Nobody says that's not going to happen, can't happen. That's the cornucopia of Access Hollywood's indomitable dominion over all, which is why I investigated Access Hollywood. It seems like a conscious pathology being inflicted through the advocacy scene of organized media, banking media. I don't like that. It doesn't make sense to me. Why are they putting pressure on the nerves of people who are already at risk and making us all afraid as though it's a duty? And they said even the attempt to hide will be detected. So if you're even a little bit afraid, you better believe they're going to come after you because they smell blood. And this wasn't Russia. It was the British. Doesn't mean the Russians aren't the same way. I have no idea. I read about them, I understand them, and I've seen things about them that I love. I think some of them are fascinating people. But I'm not trying to break the picket line, so to speak. I realize at the very least there's a picket against Russia. There's sanctions everywhere. I'm not trying to break it. I'm just pointing out that I'm a person who doesn't know everything. I was deaf. I was a dishwasher for a long time. I wasn't allowed to go to school. They didn't teach me sign language. Boy, did they ever punish the girl who did. Teach me sign language. What's that got to do with Russia? Does that have something to do with Russia? If you have some way of making me understand what that has to do with Russia, well, please be my guest. I'd be happy to hear it. Send me a letter in my mailbox. It says, "Dear Jimmy, what the rape of your deaf advocate has to do with Russia is dot, dot, dot." And any money, the only thing anybody's going to come up with is nothing. It has nothing to do with Russia. It has absolutely zero to do with Russia. What are you making it for? I didn't even make you twist your ankle, dude. It wasn't me who made you twist your ankle. I didn't send Steve Langer margaritas through the atmosphere